Okay. I wasn't going to do this, but I'm going to do it now anyway because I'm actually kind of annoyed. Just watched the film version with the people on here of Agatha Christie's Ordeal by Innocence, sorry, because I just read it, and I'll do that sometimes with some of her stuff if I haven't already seen it. Either the David Suchet Poirot or the Joan Hickson Miss Marple, which I've pretty much seen most of those beforehand anyway. And the ones that I haven't, I watched after I read the books. I've read about 41, 42 of her 80 plus books. And this was just sort of, oh, I don't have this, so I picked it up and all that. And it's on Amazon Prime, and it's got the British actor Bill Nye and a handful of other people that if you've watched Britishy stuff, you've probably recognized here or there somewhere, including that Alice Eve who is in the J.J. Abrams Star Trek and name only Star Trek movies, or at least one of them. As a side note, they're fun movies, but they're not Star Trek because they're basically just sci-fi action movies instead of actually having a sort of moral purpose, which Star Trek movies should. But this is book snob. Part of this is book snob coming out, admittedly. But why do people make movies or shows or something based on source with source material titles and names and all that and not utilize the source material? I understand that in some instances some things have to be sort of maneuvered, manipulated, or sort of film washed in one way or the other to make it appropriate for screen. I understand that. But when you fundamentally change the characters and the story, why did you even use the source material anyway? I understand part of it might be because, all right, well, this is going to get me the funding I want to film this that I'm not going to be able to film anyway. But at that point in time, do the source material well, then that will open up other projects for you to do the things that you want to do. And with that, so, and on top of that, if you're going to use source material and fundamentally change the characters, don't use Agatha Christie. Agatha Christie knew enough about people and psychology and how people behaved and motivation and all sorts of ways and other stuff enough anyway. You filmmakers aren't going to make it any better. On top of which, you're definitely not going to make it any better if you're in this modern idea that everyone's got to be a piece of shit. I don't know why this started. I know I can point to it in some places in terms of if we're talking about like comic books or something like that. I think it kind of started maybe late 60s, early 70s. There's a lot of those 70 movies like Taxi Driver or something like that where kind of everyone's a piece of shit. And I don't really understand how or why that sort of mindset in film, television, and theater and books and everything really took off. I don't get it. Everyone's creaming themselves over, oh, it's more realistic. First of all, no, the fuck it's not. It's not. Second of all, why would I want hyper realism if I'm trying to watch fiction? We have nonfiction stuff for that anyway. But third of all, it's not. Not everything is David Mamet, where everyone is just personality disorders having their lives sort of dodgems against each other and vague consequences of other people's actions in terms and then the consequences of their action but not happening. That's not the way life fucking works. And especially if you're going to use Agatha Christie as your baseline for what you're trying to do, most people aren't going to do better than her psychology. Most people aren't going to do better than her characterizations and her motivations and things like that. She has sold, was it Shakespeare and the Bible, the only things that have outsold her? And they kind of had a, a couple 100 year or more, head start. She's had 80 plus books that have pretty much been in print or or reprinted consistently for like 100 years now. So no, you filmmakers trying to make a name for yourself and trying to be edgy and cute and artsy and bold or whatever aren't going to do better than that. You're not. So we need to, as a society in the West, get it out of our collective wannabe anti-hero, wannabe shitty understanding of what a real badass is mentality, that everyone's got to be a piece of shit in order for it to be gritty or realistic or any of this other bullshit. Tired. I'm sick and fucking tired of it. You can't even have things that should have been sort of like, hey, this is going to be cool or funny or anything like that, without it getting twisted into, no, everyone's an asshole. That's one, and which is interesting because I do tend to sort of focus on David Mamet with that example a lot. Because when I was in, late high school, early college, and was doing a lot of theater, I got exposed to some of that, and everyone was like, oh, he's so brilliant. It was like, all right, so he's famous for using the F word the most of any play ever. Big deal. I've read a couple of his plays. I've watched a couple film adaptations of his stuff, and I'm just like, everyone's a piece of shit. Everyone. And it's just people with a personality disorder monologuing in front of other people with personality disorder and just cutting the timing to make it look like they're pretending to have a conversation, but they're not. And people are just assholes. Which is why when I just sort of like, all right, I'll give it a shot, when he made the movie Red Belt with Chiwetel Ejiofor. And Alice Braga's in it, and a bunch of other, was it Emily, blanking on her last name, I apologize for that. But it was like, all right, I like Chiwetel Ejiofor, I like Alice Braga, it's got martial arts stuff in it, I'll give it a shot. And I was really pleasantly surprised because, yes, everyone was most people in it were kind of dicks and really kind of selfish, out for their own sort of thing. But the two people who weren't ended up kind of winning at the end. Like the main guy, Chiwetel Ejiofor's character, was a legitimate good guy, and he had like this old school sort of honor system and like sort of trying to make a true understanding of martial arts. And then there was like the Emily woman is again, I'm sorry, Mortimer. There it is, Emily Mortimer's character, and that had like this like traumatic background and everything like that, and he was able to kind of help her. And they ended up kind of symbolically and then even literally sort of winning there at the end. They exposed all this other stuff going on. So I was really surprised that David Mamet actually had a couple people in one of his works that were legitimately good people who ended up kind of coming out on top. Where was I going with that? Oh yeah, but so I do kind of blame him for that in a lot of ways, and because that seems to be sort of a cultural sort of spike when some of those things happen. And I was around enough theater people to know that people get real arty about all this stuff, and it's ridiculous and it's annoying. But a lot of the things, again, I and this also goes back to, if we talk about like some of that stuff from the 70s, I understand things are a certain amount of creation of the time they were created in. But I think also for things to become classic, there needs to be some sort of universality to them, which is why Shakespeare and things can be so reproduced in such a variety of ways over time, because there's a universality to it. A lot of this mythologies and the underlying sort of consistencies across cultures made things like Star Wars accessible, because it could hit a lot of points for like everybody. But in the 70s, I'll use Taxi Driver as an example. I've watched a bunch of those, the Taxi Drivers, the Deer Hunters, the Deliverances, and stuff like that. And quite frankly, I couldn't stand them. It took an immense amount of effort for me just to get through sitting watching them through one sitting. Especially Taxi Driver. Everyone's an asshole. Everyone's a piece of shit. And it's like, oh, why? And we do tend to be like, oh, pirates or ninjas or Vikings or all these other people are awesome, and we love them and everything, but generally not good people. The Norse, the Northern Europeans who went to Viking, as the verb actually is, not good people. Pirates, not good people. Ninjas, assassins, not good people. I mean, we have these people who, rape, rob, murder, pillage, arson. They're committing like hardcore major felonies against people time and time again. And these are supposed to be people that we're supposed to be awesome against. And now we're going to have parades where everyone talks like this all day. Great. Awesome. Let's completely ignore the actual history. So, you see stuff like that from the 70s where everyone's an asshole or everyone's kind of a piece of shit. It's sort of like, why are we exalting this? This isn't realistic. This isn't the way gritty reality really is. But somehow we've got to hold on to that. That was one of the cool things about, for like Dog Day Afternoon. That was a good movie. Even though people were doing kind of bad stuff, there was the humanity to them. There was like this kind of other balance sort of thing to them. Because what made Godfather 1 and 2 sort of that compelling, because yes, the mob people, not good people in general, but there were people who were still kind of human in that. Maybe there was some sociopaths or psychopaths even in some ways, but there was some other side to them too, where it wasn't just one note sort of like being an asshole. In horror movies, the people that in these 70s movies, they'd be murdered because they were the dicks who never changed. So they'd be murdered by, Jason or Michael Myers or something like that, probably fairly early on. And good riddance in those movies. You're kind of like, yay. But, we have 40 years of cinema and theater and books and everything that's describing all this. So now we have someone who's bleeding that into Agatha Christie stuff, which is unnecessary. One of the reasons why I really love, like, especially the David Suchet Poirot and the Joan Hickson Miss Marple, is because that's like dead on perfect. It's one of the same reasons that I love the Jeremy Brett Sherlock Holmes stuff from Grenada back in like the 80s, is that again, it's part of it's the book snob sort of thing, because those are amazingly accurate page to screen adaptations. And yes, there are some things that have to be sort of switched and changed a little bit or anything else like that. But the spirit of it, a lot of the letter of it, and is the same. And they didn't really do much in terms of having to manipulate the story, manipulate the characters or the characteristics of people, try and change the psychology of stuff like that. It was like, we're a fan of this stuff, so we're going to put this stuff out as close to it as we can. This movie, on the other hand, it's three-parter. I'm just going to call it a movie, limited TV series, serial, whatever. This one, on the other hand, decided that we are going to fundamentally change pretty much every damn thing about it. And even the couple people who are kind of assholes, we're going to make them mega assholes. The people who are trying to get to the bottom of the mystery, we're going to make sure are completely unbelievable. We're going to fundamentally change the relationships in some of the people, like fundamentally, like not even just like, oh, this is an acting choice. No, the actual thing of these relationships is completely different. Not only that, the person who done it is completely different, and for completely different reasons. So why the fuck people who made the Ordeal by Innocence 3-part movie on Amazon Prime and everything, Why did you even bother using this as a source material? Maybe use it as a certain guide sort of thing. Change maybe the location, change maybe the time frame of it. Instead of the 50s, drop it back maybe into the 30s or something like that. Change some of the names, and you know what? You have an original work. Maybe do an Agatha Christie or something like that correctly and right, and then go and do your little pet project. But don't take something that's supposed to be this and utterly change it. They do that time and time again. I remember reading something when they made that World War Z movie with Brad Pitt, and Max Brooks was like, "It's a fun movie. It's not my book. It has nothing to do with my book, but it's a fun movie." Or I mean, I have some respect for people who can sort of unabashed be like, "Yeah, we changed it. Okay." Like what's his name? Was it Michael Hurst, I think, who creates the Vikings TV show? He's just like, "Yeah, it's actually completely not historically accurate. It's just I wanted these, and there are people in it who are 200 years apart from each other. But he's like, I just wanted to put these people in together." It's like, all right, I kind of respect that. If you're not watching this for historically accurate sort of thing, and it's just sort of, a borderline fantasy sort of show, okay, cool. But if you're going to, it's not even like some of those other ones based on true events, based on the real life sort of thing. This true stories of, it's not doing that. So it's not trying to sell itself into something that it's not. This movie or series or whatever is trying to sell itself into something it's not. So we've got the basic plot is that there's this now older couple, and the woman is an heiress, and the guy is sort of loves her and is sort of like a, well, yes dear sort of person, and got more sort of, well, yes dear, as time went on. And she's sort of like a bull in a china shop in a lot of ways, and they couldn't have kids, and so they ended up adopting a few, like five, including a couple through the after the in World War II, because of the Blitz. Some kids were sort of fostered out into country places, so they'd be out of London for the Blitz, and including a couple of those. And one of them had a kind of a stick up his ass about that, and he, felt that, oh, there's a lot of resentment going on. So there's like five of these kids, and like the husband sort of is, starts kind of veering off, kind of doing his own thing in terms of like writing and staying in the study and kind of working and just sort of yes dear with whatever she wants to do with her charities and everything else like that. Um, so like the kids grow up, and then one night the mom is murdered, and all evidence points to the one kid, Jack, who was sort of like, fuck you for adopting me, you should have left me with my shitty mom in the Blitz. And he ends up getting convicted and dies of, I think, pneumonia while in prison. And all the evidence pointed to it. The guy was a loose cannon, kind of violent anyway, and they're getting into a sort of conversation of nature versus nurture sort of thing. So he supposedly had this guy for an alibi, and the guy never came forward, so everyone thought he was just making it up. A couple years later, this guy, meets with these lawyers and then meets with the family and says, "That was me. I was the one who gave him the ride. And I didn't know anything was going on because I got after I dropped him off, I ended up getting a bump in the head. I had a concussion. That messed me up for a while. And then I went to the Antarctica or Arctic or some coldy place for the last 2 years because he's a scientist. He's working on all this other stuff. And I didn't find out about this until right now." And that starts stirring all this stuff up, and people are mad at him for stirring all this stuff up. And he's like, "Listen, this is just the right thing to do. I thought you would want to know that this guy didn't do it. He's your brother, he's your son, or anything. It's fine." Meantime, the dad is engaged to the sort of secretary, but she was very clear in the book, no funny business was going on before the wife was murdered. Like that sort of happened afterwards. And everyone kind of has like their own little problems with mom and everything else like that. and Jack was the one who they thought did it and who died in prison, was kind of a Lothario too. He was, real manipulative with some of the middle-aged women and all this other stuff. So, and then the one oldest daughter had a husband who was a jet pilot, was I think a jet pilot, was a pilot in the military, and then got the paralytic form of polio. So, Dr. Calgary, the guy who had the concussion, went up, comes in, kind of all this stuff gets stirred up, and then yeah, the pilot husband wants to start, messing around with things, and Calgary is real, just sort of like, hey, I want to get to the bottom of this. I feel bad that this is kind of the stuff that happened, and everything else like that. So, it comes out, spoiler alert, it was the maid did it. She had been with them for, 20 years or something at that point in time, including during the Blitz stuff, and they had it where she was kind of, manipulated in by Jack, the one son who they thought did it and died. So she sort of did it because it was, kind of got manipulated, and he would have an alibi because everyone thought it'd be him and no one would think it was her, and all this other stuff. So there was, these underlying currents of why that would work and everything else like that too. In the movie, the mom was not only just sort of desperately wanted to be a mother, but also kind of controlling. She was downright like, I mean, she was an absolute bitch. And the dad is banging the secretary and apparently everything else in the entire world half the time, and she knew about it. So the dad's now just sticking it wherever, kind of piece of shit. Turns out that he knocked up the maid, the Kirsten, the maid who did it in the book. He knocked her up, and then Jack's their son, and Calgary is guilty because he was a physicist, and he was one of the satellite people who apparently worked on like the Manhattan Project. So they're bringing in this, even though so he helped with some of the equation work with that. So now he's tormented for being a compartmentalized minor part of building the atomic bomb. So now he's guilty about that, and he wasn't, got a accidental concussion, went away. That was his story, but what it really was, he escaped from a mental asylum. So now we got to throw in mental asylums with this now too, and he's super twitchy, and you don't know whether or not he's super crazy or not. And then the pilot isn't just sort of like, not. I mean, he's exponentially more of an absolute complete shitty person than everything too. It's like almost everyone in this is exponentially more of a bad person, is exponentially more of a massive dick. A couple of the other people kind of get a little bit of a pass and become a little bit minorly better. Mike or Mickey, I don't think in the book he served in Korea, but he did in the show. And even though he's still sort of like hot tempered and stuff, he's still kind of like the little bit more of a decent person. And Hester's about the same. But I mean, so a lot of the people on here are massively worse people. Turns out, again, spoiler, it was the dad who did it because, again, he was boinking the secretary. The woman found out, and she's finding all this stuff out all at one time. She's paying off Hester's, husband, drugging her, making her, and it wasn't in the book at all that the mom, Rachel, went in there, paid off Hester's sort of, runaway sort of fling, drugged her, and then took her to a hospital to get checked out, found out she was pregnant, and made the doctor give her an abortion. None of that was in the book at all. And it all sort of gets thrown, and there's a lot of this that gets thrown in the last of the 3 episodes. And the way that they set up in the last of the 3 episodes isn't like where anyone puts it together. in the book we've got a couple people who kind of come together, and like the one guy, Calgary, kind of figures it out, a la detective, and so you're kind of working things out and can kind of get things um, discussed with you as sort of a participant, as sort of stock and cheesy as this sort of Poirot or Sherlock Holmes sort of reveal. At the end, it talks to you, it walks you through as the audience. This didn't do that. It's just sort of a couple people saw something or looked at each other in a funny way, and now all of a sudden we're going to get 40 minutes of backstory and giving everyone exponentially more motive. And then we're not even going to have a reveal for it. We're just going to be like, oh, this is just part of the flashback that no one saw the dad conquer on the head with Anubis, which I think symbolically is an interesting touch. But so they changed how the murder weapon was and how they figured it out and all this other stuff. Uh, and then Calgary gets taken away again with the crazy house, even though he got out. And the dad setting all this stuff up on the wedding day, and everyone confronts him about figuring out that he's the dad of Jack. Like all this stuff that didn't happen, and some of it just kind of gets info dumped at you, thrown at you in the sort of literal third act there in the third episode. It's just sort of like the way, especially it turned out. Now I'm not gonna lie, faking the dad's faking Leo's suicide in the lake, but really having him locked up in this bomb shelter that everyone was like, well, mom's going crazy, she's building this bomb shelter. Apparently she had it so she could have her panic attacks. Apparently now she's having these panic attacks and is taking all these pills and stuff for him and everything like that. So she built apparently a nuclear shelter with bunk beds and stuff to be able so she could hide her panic attacks. Is what it looked like. It wasn't really explained, that's what it looked like. So they ended up basically imprisoning the dad in the bomb shelter with that. I thought that was sort of like a wicked little touch, especially with the maid Kirsten, the way like she kind of acted it out, and she was finally like sort of happy. She's real stern and kind of miserable most of the time. I mean, she was kind of happy and had like this lilt in her step. It was like, you know what, like taken on its own, if this wasn't supposedly based on an Agatha Christie book, if it would have been on its own, like that ending would have been like, oh man, that was awesome. Like I would have really enjoyed that ending. It's like what I had discussed with a friend of mine about, the last few episodes of Game of Thrones. If you took the sort of raid of, the fight with the Night King at Winterfell, and then Daenerys' sort of torching of King's Landing, if those two episodes were kind of standalone and all you knew is what was sort of given to you with that, if those had been like their own movies or like maybe in a movie series or something, but more standalone without the backstory, let alone the backstory that the show completely destroyed and mutilated and completely and utterly screwed up, then okay, these would have been interesting to watch. It would have been kind of satisfying and all this. Oh, what a twist with all that. If you didn't have all this other stuff going on and all this other stuff sort of emotionally involved with it. So taken on its own without that connection to an actual physical Agatha Christie book, I still would not have liked the miniseries, because again it went into the everyone's kind of got to be a bastard in order for this to be gritty and interesting and real. The ending though, with Leo, the dad, the husband, locked in that sort of not air raid shelter, that nuclear shelter sort of thing after manipulating all this other stuff, that would have been like, oh, that's messed up. I still might have liked that sort of ending though, because it is a little messed up, and I kind of like that. But so yeah, if you like the Agatha Christie books, don't bother watching this. The people in it do a great job. The people in it are really good actors and they do a really good job with what they had. Unfortunately, what they had was crap, and feeding into this modern bullshit of people having to be gritty and real in a way that isn't gritty or real. I mean, we get enough of that with, Frank Miller Batman stuff, and Zack Snyder's just, oh, everyone's got to be an ass, so I'm going to make Superman a piece of shit. Oh, Frank Miller. Bullshit. A lot of these things sort of feed into each other. It's not awesome, it's not badass, it's not interesting. It makes things less interesting and less badass and less realistic. Even the sort of noir detective stories where things were kind of gritty, and it was sort of like you went into it thinking that, oh, these people are all going to be bad, but then they showed good sides to themselves and balanced sides, and then you kind of get, or maybe they were in really shitty situations and had to make the best of it with what it is. There's a fine line in those sort of like those good noir novels, the Raymond Chandlers and Dashiell Hammetts and stuff like that, walk that line of that sort of anti-hero, but still kind of a hero, and where like the bad guys are still kind of the bad guys and the good guys maybe aren't perfect, so maybe a little bit more realistic, but still interesting, and there's still kind of like a hope with it, as opposed to a lot of the stuff now is just everyone's just assholes. So the book I really liked, and and the acting in the show I really liked. But the changes from the book to the show, and the changes in terms of trying to make things gritty and psychologically more interesting and more, you know, change it. At that point in time, just make your own damn show. Just make your own damn movie. Stop trying to capitalize on someone else's work if you're not going to basically honor that work. You know? Yeah, I mean that's kind of all I have for that. So okay, Ordeal by Innocence. The book, cool. The show, not as much. All right, see yous. Thank you for watching, listening, and just whatever with me just ranting about stuff with Agatha Christie.